has been our opinion that in 2024, we want to pay a lot of attention to a men's ministry focus and a women's ministry focus. To talk about biblical manhood and talk about biblical womanhood. And so we're going to be putting some emphasis on men's ministry and on women's ministry in the year to come, talking about those things. Because I think they're important things in thinking about not conforming to the world, but being transformed by the Spirit of God. And this morning, I want to close in a long way by inviting two people up to talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to invite Matthew Geary to come and Paige McBride to come to share in a conversation with me. Because here's the naivete of your pastor, right? I was thinking, man, let's really ramp up men's ministry. Let's really ramp up women's ministry. Let's talk about biblical manhood and biblical womanhood. And then these two brilliant minds goes, you know how potentially controversial that could be, right? I went, oh, yeah, I guess it could be. Which is the reality of this non-conformity to the world, and yet transformed by the Spirit of God. So I said, well, then I need you to help me in the sermon, and let's talk a little bit about that right out of the chute. Okay? So here's a really quick conversation between two brilliant minds and a pastor who stands in between them in doing this. And so I just have three questions for them and invite both of them to kind of respond quickly in doing that. But Paige, I'm going to start with you. We do believe that God has something to say regarding biblical gender, right? Why is it important to get biblical gender, biblical manhood and womanhood conversations right?
Sure. The first thing that comes to my mind would be that we believe as Christians that we are intentionally created with a design, right? So we don't believe that we just sort of came about and this is randomly how we ended up being, but we believe that God intentionally created us with purpose, with design. And at the beginning of the Bible, the very first thing that we learn about that is that God created us in his likeness to be his image. And right with that common call to be his image, he specifically says that he calls us to do that as male and female. And so I really think it's a question of flourishing. If something does not know its design, it cannot flourish. The only way for something to do what it was made to do is to know what it was made to do. And so if we continue to be ignorant of or in tension with the design of God, then we're not going to find the transformation and the beauty and the flourishing that comes on the side of being who God made us to be. A lot of times people think of this as, okay, so we have to be this way or that way because we're boy or girl. But I would actually think of it more as you get to flourish in what God made you to be. And what God made us to be is always better than what we would like ourselves to be. And so I think this question of design helps us think about it from a perspective of human flourishing and God's glory.
Good, thanks. Matthew, add?
Yeah, just to add to human flourishing, because I think that is what is at stake, is human flourishing. Genderhood, biblical genderhood, is rooted in our idea of identity, right? So identity is the main question that we're after when we're talking about genderhood. And both in our culture at large and in Christian culture, because Christian culture is not necessarily always right, we tend to isolate bits of our identity and put them as most important, right? So in our culture, it may be our sexuality that we put as most important, or it may be the businessman who worships the idol of money, right? Or in our Christian subculture, we may put as forward the congregant and the person who does Bible study, and that's our most important identity, right? But I think what's important about having these conversations is that God offers us integration of our identity, where it's not just putting one piece forward, but it's putting Christ at the center and seeing how every bit of our identity actually falls into place with him there. So that's why I think what's at stake if we don't have these conversations is disintegration, which leads to confusion and anxiety, things that I'm sure all of us have experienced in this room. But as we focus on this identity piece and make it most important, then we actually find contentment and joy as we become integrated people.